The Intellectual Gentlemen's Club.
Hey, welcome back, gentlemen and ladies out there. If this is your first time, welcome to the show. I encourage you to check out our website at intellectualgentlemensclub.com. All our podcasts are on there. Everybody who's been on the podcast is in the IGC crew tab. You can check out their projects and follow them on social media. Give them some digital love. I recommend you guys check out our brothers over at the Journey podcast. Both Nick and Paul have been on the IGC before, and they're putting out a really good product. A lot of philosophy, if you guys are into that. It's usually the two of them, or they have one guest on. Go ahead and check them out, the Journey podcast. They're also available on iTunes like us. If you want to support the show, you can head on over to our support page at theintellectualgentlemensclub.com. We have a support tab. Click right on that. It brings you into our affiliate sponsors for Amazon, Audible, and Onnit.com. Anything you purchase within your portal click, we get a small cut of the corporate dollars that are associated for advertising fees and whatnot. Works out pretty good for both of us, if I don't say so myself. I'm actually recording this intro and the exit today on mobile equipment purchased by somebody who graciously donated to our PayPal button. Thanks again to Renault Video Productions. Give them some love over there at RenaultVP.com for all your video production needs. Today I have a in-depth conversation about a touchy subject for a lot of people, sexual abuse. Concentrate on male sexual abuse today. You're going to be hearing from Bodhi Bryan. He is a sexual abuse survivor. He's going to talk about how he has coped over the years with his abuses. And also who we have in the podcast is Jasmin Newman. She is a contributor to the Good Men Project. You can check them out at goodmenproject.com. She wrote an article. She'll explain a little bit in the podcast here about 3 survivors of sexual abuse, men. And Matt and Jasmin teamed up and created something called Hurt to Healing. It's a project for men to start the healing process and be able to talk to people about their past issues without shame, and it's largely a great project. I really wanted to get this out in time for their Indiegogo campaign. You may hear us talking about there, but life is busy. A lot of podcasts were backed up, and unfortunately I couldn't get it out till now. So if you want to reach out to them, you can visit them in the episode notes. They're on Facebook. Hurt to Healing is on Twitter and Facebook. So I should really let them explain. Without further ado, let's launch the interview. Hope you guys enjoy it. Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. We are here at the interview, and I'd like to welcome our 2 guests today, Bodhi Bryan and Jasmin Newman. You've heard me do a brief introduction already. They are contributors to the Good Men Project, and they have a website called Hurt to Healing. It's devoted to sexual abuse and the healing process behind that. Jasmin, welcome to the show. Matt, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So maybe one of you could run down exactly what Hurt to Healing is. I've already kind of given you guys a little introduction for everybody, but why don't you give us the rundown?
Okay, well, Hurt to Healing came about through an article that I wrote, that I published for Good Men Project on sexual assault against men. And I had a number of clients that voiced their what had happened to them in their childhood as well as in their adult lives to me in one of my coaching groups. And Good Men Project asked me to write an article for them about that. And statistically, we know that 1 in 6 men have been sexually abused or assaulted in their lifetime. That number seems alarming to some people. However, we feel that it's probably much higher than that. But so the Hurt to Healing program came about. Matt was one of the very courageous men who spoke up, and I extracted 3 articles or 3 stories from these men who had all actually healed through their process. And we realised the importance of the healing journey, and that it's not all darkness, and that these things happen to men. And so that's how it kind of all began. And Matt and I had known each other for a little while. We've moved in a couple of the same circles in relation to our personal training backgrounds. And so we decided to form a partnership and put together a coaching-based and a healing-based program that could help men.
That's really cool. When did all this get started?
I think it was mid-September.
Mid-September.
Early to mid-September, we started working on this.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I noticed, Jasmin, you're an Aussie, but you're on a world tour right now. So what have you been doing on that world tour?
It's become a world tour now. I just went from the States to Canada. So, yes, I am an Aussie, and I'm so used to talking to Americans now that I even forget that I've got an accent. I flew into Newark to meet Matt and to attend the Male Survivor Conference. And so we pretty much had a week there, a couple of days of me getting over jet lag, and then 3 days at the conference before we went down to Chicago. And we hung out in Chicago for about 10 days and trying to get a hold of some of the psychologists and the media outlets and just people to talk to and to raise awareness for sexual assault against men, and to find some media outlets to talk to. And then we went down to St. Louis for a week and did the same there, went out to speak to some of the universities. And then, I went back to Chicago for a little bit. Matt's now back in Michigan. And I've just come up to Canada to see a friend.
Excellent. Well, Matt, why don't you give us a background? How did you guys get initially hooked up in order for you to get your story out there? And I'm wondering if you could actually give us your a breakdown of your story. It seems I was reading it, and I was kind of surprised you've had multiple issues pop up in your life regarding this type of issue.
Oh yeah, I've had. It started. The interesting thing is like my first memory of my sexual abuse happened when I was 43. When I recovered a memory. It was basically a snapshot of my first abuse. I was between the ages of 2 and 3. And it was, basically I'm not going to get into it because I don't want to trigger anybody who's listening, but it was basically a neighborhood boy and my brother and I being involved in a sexual incident. Considering when it actually happened, it was the more daunting of the experiences. I was working out in a world gym at the time in Glendale, California, and it just popped into my head in the middle of doing reps on an exercise, and I was crushed. I just basically sat there crying for a half an hour, trying to deal with this and trying to muster up the strength and energy to, move to the locker room, go into the sauna, and just relax and start working through healing on this. Funny thing is that as powerful as that was, it essentially took me about 2 to 3 weeks to heal through that. Because I had already had so much infrastructure into place to handle everything that ever came to my plate. But the rest of my childhood abuse was essentially started when I was 4. My physical abuse started then. That happened until I was about 13. And when I was actually molested by another man when I think it was 5 or 6, in the locker room after swim practice. And, you would think that a man my size, for my further experience, you'd think that a man my size couldn't get raped. But I was actually raped by a woman that I had been dating and we'd broke up with. I broke up with her, and I told her she needed to sleep in another room, and I was doing her a favor by having her spend the night there instead of, just being out in the street. And I woke up with her on top of me. And when I realized what was going on, I immediately threw her off of me and told her to get out of my room. And that was all that happened. For the longest time, I didn't think it was rape. And then I started telling friends about it, and they started laughing at me. And, I read up on it, and I found out that, if I believe it was rape, it was rape because I told her no, that our relationship was over. There was not going to be any sex. There was not going to be anything further between us. It was like she was to leave in the morning, and that was going to be it.
So I'm sorry to briefly interrupt here, but when you said that everybody was laughing at you, do you think that's because of just the way that men look at sex, as far as like, well, men always like sex, so there's this like disconnect where men can't get raped, but obviously that's not the case.
Yeah, that is actually, for your readers, I'm 6 foot tall, over 225 pounds. So, and at the time I was about 205 pounds. But, they were laughing at me because they knew that I already liked having sex, and that,
Sure.
I'd had like a few one night stands, and I was known as a player. I mean, it was in Chicago in the 90s. Of course I was going to be a complete ass to women. Is some of the axes we have to carry. But yeah, they were laughing at me because a lot of them knew that I did like having sex. So
who doesn't, right?
Their statement was,
there's some people that don't, but the vast majority of the people I know like having sex, right?
Yeah, I mean, so they were laughing at me because, like, well, why wouldn't you just, enjoyed it? It's like, because I told her no, and that was, what my final statement, and people have asked me is, why didn't you go to the police? And just like, I knew for a fact that I wouldn't get any support from the police, because if my friends weren't supporting me, there's no way in the world somebody else looking at me would support me.
So, Jasmin, earlier you mentioned that 1 in 6 experience some type of sexual abuse, and that's men. Do you think that those numbers are even further skewed by what Matt's talking about, as far as, the believability of society on men and rape?
There's a great deal of denial and lack of awareness as well. I mean, this isn't anybody's fault in particular, but it's something that we don't want to talk about, and it's something that a lot of people have a hard time coming to terms with. There's an enormous amount of shame around it, largely. A lot of people also don't necessarily trigger in their early years, so they're well into their adult years before their memories come back. And I think that has a lot to do with it, because there's such a long time between what happened and when they really become fully aware of what happened to them. And, one of the things that I've picked up over the time is that often it's, as parents, because I was abused as a child as well, and as parents, it's when we become parents and our children become the age that we were when we were abused, that seems to be a common theme for us, a common time for us to trigger. Because we have memories and flashbacks and all sorts of things going on. But there's an enormous amount of shame for men, that they're not that they weren't strong enough, or that they weren't, tough enough, or, powerful enough to get through that. And of course, that's what how men are perceived in the community. But this is a crushing violation that nobody should have to go through. And man or woman, everybody has feelings. So that's where I think a lot of it comes from.
Interesting. I'm curious about the difference between our geographical locations. In Australia, do you see it being a little bit viewed as differently, or is it about the same as the United States?
Really, my work's been focused in the States since undertaking this, but I'm participating in a couple of forums at home. I think the movement of awareness is bigger in the States, but you have a bigger country and a bigger population too. So I think we're getting there. I think the shame issues are exactly the same, because men are men, around the world, and well, maybe that's not so true in some cultures, but certainly between Australia and America, I would
Western
say we're fairly
society,
similar.
right?
Yeah, Western society, definitely. I know. I think they're the same issues. An interesting conversation I had the other day with a man who had been assaulted, and I was talking to him about raising awareness for male sexual assault, and he quite candidly said that he had been sexually assaulted in his childhood, and it was just a matter of it kind of happened to all of us, didn't it? And I was like, well, yeah, it kind of did, but not everybody's healed. Not everybody's worked through that, and he had worked through that, but it was one of the things that Matt and I have discussed a little bit just recently is that, in our, like I'm in my late 40s, so is Matt, and it seems that culturally there was just this era of pedophiles and sexual abuse and assault amongst children, going back to the around the 1970s, late 60s, probably even earlier than that. Where, there was an enormous amount of children that were violated. We have so much more awareness, community awareness around it now that the prevention mechanisms that are in place are much higher, and our awareness on what to pick up on is much higher. It still goes on, but it seems back in the day that it was happening and almost commonplace.
Well, you always hear about kids that were abused in church, with the whole priest scandal. You hear about a lot of things like that. You also hear about, as far as, rape with men, you hear a lot of it. People don't talk about like the prison rape. It's almost just the fact of life. If you're going to go to prison, you're going to be raped if you're a man. Right. So does that 1 in 6 statistic, does that line up with prison, or does... what's...
I'm not too sure. Yeah, I actually don't know.
We did hear about, we know one statistic in New Zealand. It's part of, because we met some men at the Male Survivor Conference that were from New Zealand. And one of them was an ex-correctional officer. And he said that it was requirement for them to answer, for the men that came into prison to answer if they were sexually abused or assaulted in their lifetime. And in the prison population, 68% in New Zealand were actually sexually abused or assaulted, which screams that this is possibly a more insidious thing than many of us even believe.
What are the statistics on women, Jasmin?
It's 1 in 4 for women.
Okay.
Statistically, and again, they're still underreporting because there's still
there's a lot of shame with women as well, I'm sure.
There's a lot of shame and often guilt attached to it. I was communicating in a forum yesterday where a woman had shared her story about putting herself in a vulnerable situation with a man, and there was so many, and she was raped, and there was a lot of blame. She was laying blame on herself for having put herself in that situation, and the comments underneath it were like, well, you should have known better, you shouldn't have put yourself in that situation. And, it's never the victim's fault. It doesn't matter. You say no, no means no, and that's the end of it. And in this particular case, that was completely violated. And so, I've been told that she went on to get help, but I don't know that for a fact. And it seemed very much like she was still living with the shame and the blame around it. And she was just trying to alert other people to what goes on. But it's certainly that the reporting is probably less for women. That being said, there's an enormous amount of men who would be listening to this who might be saying, women scream rape, when it's also not rape. We, it's never anyone else's place to judge that. I believe, obviously, with all these things, there's always going to be a percentage on either side. But the important thing to remember is that men can be victims too, that it's not, that it's not all men raping women, that women rape men, and a lot of men have been sexually abused in their childhood.
I know from personal experience, some of my friends have been abused by women in their backgrounds, and I'm talking about in childhood where, there's a lot of play that's going around that was not wanted, and he made it very clear that it wasn't wanted. And this was an older girl, and it fucked him up for a large part of his life. And like you're saying, you have these triggers that come up. Matt, you're just working out, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, it comes out of nowhere, right? So
Yeah.
once somebody does trigger and has these memories, what begins the healing process, and where do people start? I mean, there's so many different blogs out there of where you begin and on how to heal yourself from sexual abuse and things like that. But basically, what we're talking about is a form of PTSD. Am I right?
A mild form. You can develop it. When later, if you have later stage sexual assaults or abuse. But it's also based on what I believe it's also based on what the body is working on. But it's my theory.
I'm interested in your theory.
Well, I believe because of my childhood abuses, have dissociative identity disorder, which means that I have 3 personalities. Well, I have 3 personalities. It doesn't mean that I have 3. These were created because of my varying stages of abuse. That happens between the ages of like 2 and 7. And then there's another stage of growth where I believe other things happen, which is, the teen years. And PTSD is when, after the age of, say, 20 to 25, when there's something so traumatic you can't deal with it and it alters your reality. And you all of a sudden now have PTSD. And PTSD is also something, as Jasmin works with a lot of men that have it, it's something that gains in strength. Like, you might have just a little bit, but every time that there's something that plays with your reality, it will alter it a little bit. And she can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear about that. Jasmin, I was looking you up a little bit, and it seems like you have a background in some neuroscience. I've actually had Dr. Carl Hart on the podcast. He's a neuroscientist, and we've talked about PTSD in the podcast a number of times and psychedelics and how that can mitigate some symptoms that you're having. We've had people on from MAPS, which is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with, Multidisciplinary Association with Psychedelic Studies. They're using MDMA. They're trying to get it approved in a medical form for therapeutic uses. Do you know of anybody who has been in contact with you that has healed themselves or been with a therapist and been under the influence of a psychedelic and had a breakthrough experience and any of that?
I haven't had any first-hand accounts of that, but mostly stories that I've kind of heard externally. I'm not a neuroscientist, but my coaching was based in neuroscience, but the coaching accreditation that I've done. And so, I look at brain set and mindset as being 2 different things. We often talk about mindset, particularly in the personal training arena, that it's all, getting through anything is all about how you view the world. And that in part is true, but it's not the whole story. Without having brain set in place first, our threat matrix is stored deeper into the brain. And for while ever we're in threat, which is, fight, flight and freeze, while ever we've got any of those things happening in the brain, while ever we're holding fear about something, we can't get to the positive mindset. We can't get to cognitive thought, to have rational thought and put perspective on things. Now, in relation to PTSD, this isn't necessarily, it's not necessarily a fix for it, because PTSD, is insidious in those people that suffer it. But it does help to understand what's going on in the brain before we look at what's going on in the mind.
Yeah, because the brain, you can actually take some data measurements on it, and the mind is very subjective. It's about all our experiences that we've had and how we've processed that information and so on and so forth. So now that we've gone over kind of the hurt process, what the healing process, Matt, I'm curious to see and hear about your experience with how you began your healing process. I see that you've dabbled heavily in Buddhism. I have in the past as well. I see you rock the mala on your wrist there all the time, and I'm just curious in how Buddhism has helped you. And did you start there, or did it lead you into that, or how did that all begin?
Well, I recently started discussing this with Jasmin because I realized that I'd done most of my healing before I hit the age of 25, and that's why my story seems to be almost matter of fact to me, where I can just tell somebody the story and not really have a personal effect on my body. I won't have a visceral reaction unless I haven't dealt with it yet. But the Buddhism, I mean, it was the whole idea, and I had a therapist told me this when I was in therapy a long time ago. She was the only therapist that ever worked for me. She told me, the good thing about you is that you remember most of your abuse. And my thought was to her, and I said this to her, how is that a good thing? I'd much rather enjoy,
ignorance is
have
bliss,
happy
right?
memories. Yeah, I would much rather have happy memories instead of knowing for a fact that I was abused. My physical abuse started at the age of 4, and I could pretty much tell you every time that my father hit me. And I'd much rather have having fun in the woods with my brother, climbing trees, falling out of trees, throwing stones at into the mud and different things. I can't recall half the things in my childhood, and so I started dealing with this early, and it was more of the acceptance. When I was in my 20s, I was a shit, and I even say that in the story that Jasmin wrote, that I was, I hated just about everybody because everybody seemed so blissfully happy, and I was mired in this. Yeah, exactly. I was mired in this depth of mud that I could not even see the top of. It's like I was just buried in it. So I would see happy people, I'd see happy couples, and I'd be like, what the hell is wrong with you that you can't see, what's going on in your life? Because it seemed a little difficult. So when I was 14, I got confirmed, and my mom told me, no, you don't have to go to church anymore. You can start your little journey on how to find out what you want to follow. So I did. And I dabbled in just about everything. For a long time, I was Wiccan. And I believed that, that was the right way to go. But I hate organized religion, and that includes Buddhism to a degree.
Yeah. And the Buddhists will tell you that too, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, some of them will. So I started, when I lived in Chicago in the 90s, I started reading a lot of Eastern philosophy. For a long time, I thought that Hinduism and Jainism were the path that I needed to go. And and then I read a book by Tara Brach, which is Radical Acceptance. And the first chapter was about her being admonished just just having a baby. It was just, it confused the hell out of me. And this was by, one of their priests. And that's why she ended up turning to Buddhism. So I'm like, okay, well, let me look at the Buddhism aspect of this. And immediately I just started grabbing everything that was basically Buddha's teachings. It was verbatim, everything that he said, or, the presumption of what he said.
The Four Noble Truths, the Three Jewels, all that.
Yeah, exactly. Is everything that he taught everybody, everything that he shared with his followers. And things started clicking and going, wow, is it really this simple? And it really was. But I mean, the journey though is not as simple as he makes it out to be. Where I actually came to my aha moment, or my enlightenment, so to speak, was when I moved back here from California in 2010, after being in a relationship with a very damaged woman. I basically spent 2 months in silent retreat, and I said a few words here and there to my mom or to my kids, but I was silent 90% of the time because I was in here in my mind and I needed to work through a lot of different things. And after 2 months, I finally got this clarity that it just said, well, if you're tired of carrying it, why don't you put it down? And I was like, really? It's going to be that simple? It's really that simple?
You really have to be ready for it, though, right?
Yeah, you do. You do have to be ready for it. I mean, because through my journeys in Buddhism, it's like I forgave everybody for everything that was done to me. I had compassion enough and, acceptance for everything that was done to me. There was a reason for it because they had the same thing growing up that I did. So there's probably not going to be a lot of leeway that I could give them. I can't sit there and fault them because of this. I can't sit there and fault them because of this. It seemed the right thing to do. And I told Jasmine that, when she was investigating the story, that it was instinctual. Buddhism seemed instinctual to me. It's like, okay, heal from the inside instead of, looking for it elsewhere. And, you asked what the first step was, and my first step was compassion and forgiveness. That I had to forgive for myself, but I also had to have compassion for the person that I was forgiving in order to give forgiveness.
Do you still feel that way to the people that have done you wrong?
Oh yeah, I have the funny thing is I used to be such an angry shit. Like I told Jasmine, and I still have this rule today, but I doubt that I would ever follow through with it. I have a 3-hit rule, 3-strike rule. When I lived in Chicago, I was, I worked as a bouncer, worked in clubs and stuff like that, bartender. And if you ever hit me, and this is, since I was like 16, this has been the case. You hit me, you get 2 more tries. You get 2 more times to really disrespect me. And
when you say hit, you mean as in disrespect, right?
Punch.
Not physical hit.
It's punch, punch, hit, disrespect, whatever.
Got you.
It's like you got strike, 2 more times before. Yeah, it's like 2 more
strikes.
You have 3 strikes. Yeah, you have 3 strikes to get me down on the ground, or to have me like give in. And it's really shown me that because I did this because I was so terrified of the anger that was inside of me, that if I ever unleashed that anger, I would probably be in prison right now. So I have to honor that anger and respect it, but that's not going to be coming out of me anytime soon. It's not sitting there, festering. I now have, because that anger is actually part of my inner child. It was the damage that happened when I was between the ages of 2 and 3.
So would you say that when you're talking about anger, I'm sorry to butt in again here, but I've through my life, I've had the same type of problem with anger. And I think most men would admit that, we got a lot of testosterone pumping through our veins here. So, over time, for me, I've been able to kind of transform my anger into compassion. Do you think that it's been transformed, or do you think it's laying repressed? I think that's probably a pretty important question.
That's a very good question. I'm not, honestly, I'll have to say that I've never thought about that, but I would say now that I think about it, because I do, and Jasmine knows this, it's like my mind is constantly moving. It's never thinking about the same thing that's going out of my mouth. So I'm, I can actually say that it probably is it's just transferred to compassion, and I wrote that, I wrote a blog for our website that was called "What We Do for Our Kids," and it was about my journey through, raising my kids through the beginning of my, when my abuse started. And the really funny thing is that my inner child went from being angry and jealous that my kids were getting something that he didn't have to being incredibly compassionate and going, well, I don't care if they didn't get what you didn't have or we didn't have, but you know what? You're not going to hurt them and give them exactly what we had. So if you don't stop it, I'm going to give you shit. So it turned into, I could now say that, yeah, it turned into compassion, because honestly, there was no other way to go.
Yeah, you don't strike me as a real angry dude. I mean, you got
No,
the bald head, you
I
got the facial hair like myself. People look at me, I got tattoos and things like that, and you have the stereotype of this guy's like a rough guy,
Oh, yeah.
But I'm much more of a lover than a fighter, even though I do like to dabble in those arenas as well. But I
have my outlet.
Yeah, I think it's important to be well-rounded. What is your outlet?
Well, my outlet, I've been working out since I was 11.
All right.
And that means that I've been pretty much doing anything, because at 47, almost 47, I've been working out longer than most people have even existed in my mind. So, I've gotten bored, so I do other things. And so I took up boxing. Hold on a minute. Boxing, kickboxing, and other things, just to be able to get through and do things. So boxing became, for a long time, through my divorce, boxing was the only thing that kept me calm.
Yeah, I've experienced the last year. It's been jiu-jitsu for me. I've had a couple injuries that have kept me away from the mats now for a while, but that's something that I've actually been missing a lot lately, is that release, that where you can take that anger that's been building up that you haven't necessarily been able to turn into compassion and to release it in a positive manner. So, Jasmin, what do you do to get a release when you're having issues?
But yeah, the female perspective is very, very different. The female psyche is very different. We cry a lot. I cry a lot. It's all a matter of releasing pain. We're always looking for whatever we can do that's going to make us feel better. Now, this is true for both men and women. Throughout my life, I've always been pretty physically active as well. I've indulged in some crazy sports like rowing 7-day surfboat marathons, and doing sort of fairly risky, full-on stuff like that.
Right on.
But in any kind of, it doesn't even matter whether it's substance abuse or recovering from trauma. We're always looking to do something that's going to make us feel better. We're always chasing a feeling. And
I would agree. Yeah.
And like crying for women is very common, because we feel better. We all feel better when we've had a cry, and you finally let it out, and that's we're biologically engineered that way. The hormones that are released after that, the endorphins that are released after that, make us feel better. So women do have a little tendency to cry, but I was also a very angry, defensive person. My whole life, I was. Everyone always told me that I was really strong. You're so strong. And I finally realised in the really pivotal part of my healing journey that I wasn't strong. I was tough. I had fought everything my entire life, and I had grown into be a very angry and defensive woman. I was very, I've always fought against injustice and those kinds of things. Like, I wasn't out being an arse of myself. I was fighting causes, but there always had to be something to fight. Everything was a fight, and I'm very much a pacifist now. And a large part of my online work has become about trying to get people to see reason and to have compassion and to come from a place of listening rather than telling, and just a far more peaceful and compassionate approach. So for me now, I live with compassion. I always try and come from a place of love. Forgiveness has been huge in my life, and in my recent life, in terms of overcoming everything. When you've got those things, which they're the core philosophies of Buddhism, and when you've got those things lined up, the world does become a much easier place to manage. You're not as reactive as what you were, because you have to. If you view the world with compassion, you have to stop and think and look through somebody else's lens. You can't have compassion otherwise. And when you do that, it makes it much easier to see what's gone on in the world that's led to that situation.
I think it's very important to look through the world with other people's eyes. I mean, everybody's heard "walk a mile in my shoes" and whatnot. And I remember as a child, I used to go people watching, right? We'd be at the mall or something when I was a kid. And I can even kind of do this to this day. I would just look over like the balcony and seeing all these different people everywhere and realizing that each one of these individual people is a true individual. They've had this whole life story. Basically, they're the hero of their own adventure, right? And everybody has been shaped, by nature and nurture, I believe, to get you to the point where you're at. So when you take a judgment on somebody, regardless of what it might be, whether it's, somebody has done you wrong or you see something on TV or whatever, anytime you pass judgment, and people pass judgment all the time, whether they tell you if they do or not, it's important to recognize that and just realize, like, look, this person has been down a different journey completely. You can't possibly understand what they've been through. I think that's very important to get along with our fellow humans. I mean, we have to understand that not anyone is going to view the world exactly as you do. So,
yeah, that's exactly right. And I mean, judgment. We need to remove judgment because if we're judging others, then we're allowing judgment into our life. And a lot of people will say, "I'm not judgmental," but they take on other people's judgment, and that's all part of the healing process as well, is accepting that we need to eliminate that, and that everything starts within. It starts with the way we view the world and the way we view ourselves.
There's been a long history in my family with sexual abuse. I won't get into any details or anything, but it's definitely fucked up our family, for the worse. Long story short, my father went through a very, very challenging life. He ended up taking his own life over a decade ago. This is related to the war and different abuses he's had in his life, and alcohol abuse, things of that nature. And I'm hoping that we're going to end the chain with this new generation. I've got some kids now. I've been very upfront with them from the beginning about what sexual abuse is, what sex is. I'm alarmed by the amount of people in really kind of even my inner circle that don't talk to their children about sex at all. They don't talk about drugs. They don't talk about much at all. That they expect society or TV or whoever to teach their children on what it is. I'm hoping that now that my kids are getting older a little bit, I have a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old, that they're starting to put pieces together on what sexual abuse really is. They're starting to come into puberty, having their own feelings, and they're exploring their own bodies and things like that. And from a very early age, I'm talking like 2-3 years old, we would talk about the genitals. Like, you see a kid tugging on themselves, and I think a lot of people have this instinct of don't touch that, right? It's like it hasn't really been like that in my house. It's been more open, and we talk about how it's a private thing when you're touching yourself and things like that. Nobody else should touch you. Doctors and if your parents are looking at you and whatnot, checking something out, a medical issue. These are specific things that they know to pick up on. I'm hoping that if somebody ever does approach them in an abusive type of manner, they're going to know right away and know what to do. I've tried to prepare them the best I can for that. There's no guarantees, obviously. There's a lot of different situations that pop up. Sometimes it's forceful, right? A lot of times people are groomed by pedophiles. That's what I've tried to, me and my wife have both tried to let them understand in a way that a child can understand on how a grown man could, want to abuse a child. Let's switch gears a little bit here and talk about pedophiles a little bit. I know that they have kind of determined them in neuroscience or behavioral science or however, that it's almost a sexual preference, that they're attracted to kids, like a heterosexual is attracted to a member of the opposite sex, and a homosexual is attracted to the same sex. How can we take this issue in modern day that everybody knows it's a rampant issue? How can we take this and make it better in society? I don't know how else to put it, but how can we change the patterns that have happened for generations? I know we talked about it earlier that, back in the 70s, kind of a heyday. It reminded me of like drunk driving. Everybody fucking drove drunk, right? So now everybody knows you can't fucking drive drunk, right? And there are very harsh punishments for that. So how can we turn that around? I mean, I know there's harsh punishments for pedophiles, but largely they're hard to recognize.
Matt and I would probably chime in and stand on a soapbox about this on the same thing.
Let's do it.
The first thing we have to recognise is that not everybody who is sexually abused goes on to abuse.
True.
However, people who abuse have most likely been abused. And so to answer your question of how do we stop this, how does this stop with us? It stops with us by healing, by allowing the healing process. That, when people can heal from this, then the cycle will stop, because there's so much anger and anxiety and frustrations, and things manifest in the wrong way, in all the negative ways, and it's turning that into a place where you're viewing the world better. So, it's very much our aim that to stop this cycle on the broad scale of things. This is why we need to raise awareness. We need to bring it to the table for conversation, that sexual abuse of males and females. We work specifically with men, because we see men as being underreported and underrepresented in society. But it's with women as well. But these conversations have to be out in the open, and that then the more we can raise awareness, and we thank you for doing this, the more we can raise awareness, then the more people we can reach, the more people are going to stand up and say, well, you know what, that happened to me too. And yeah, actually, that wasn't okay, or that affected me like this, and then I see that. And that's how we stop it. That's the way we see things. Would you agree, Matt?
I do, to a point, and I just realized when you were talking that, and we talk about maladaptive behaviors a lot, Jasmine and I do, as not, and this is where we see, I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, this is where we see an issue with the current way that things are handled. They deal with the symptoms, or they deal with the maladaptive behaviors such as alcoholism, drug addiction, sexual addictions, food addictions,
not
whatever.
Not the root of the problem, though, am I right?
Yeah, the root. That's not the root of the problem.
Right.
And as you were talking, I just realized pedophilia is actually a sexual addiction towards children. It is not. It's a maladaptive behavior to a degree, that it is done because they can't cope with what's going on inside of them, just like every other maladaptive behavior. So they try to put these feelings, this anger, this fear, at rest, or put it to sleep, or even numb it by their behaviors. But if you can't deal with the issue, and this is where Jasmine and I work directly with the issue, if you cannot handle dealing with the issue, then you really shouldn't be dealing with the maladaptive behavior. So like the clinical way of dealing with things now is, okay, well, he's an alcoholic. Let's cure him of his alcoholism. My brother was an alcoholic and a drug addict, who almost killed himself within 8 months. Now, was he sexually abused? I do not know. I don't think so, and I know that he wasn't physically abused, because he hated the fact that my brother and I were being physically abused. But was he a witness of a lot of this physical abuse? Oh, hell yes, he was. He was probably one of the only people that knew what was going on in the house, besides my brother and I.
Which can be very damaging, obviously.
Oh, yeah. And, the funny thing is he thought for a long time, if he slept in our room on the floor, my dad wouldn't come in. Our dad wouldn't come in and beat the hell out of my brother and I. So my brother would either camp out right by, and he's, 3-4 years younger than me. He would camp out either at the door and fall asleep at the door, or he would fall asleep at the foot of one of our beds. Just to,
sounds like
because
a lot of
he
survivor's
wanted to
guilt,
have,
maybe.
yeah, and honestly, I agree with that. So, the adaptive behavior was not dealt with, and I watched him because I went through rehab with him, and they never talked about what's going on underneath, what was causing this desire to, and I believe that all this maladaptive behavior is a slow, passive way of killing yourself, or making life as painful as it can possibly be. And pedophiles, as far as that goes, I believe we all can be healed. Not 100% healed, but I believe that we can actually start walking around with the scars visible and not have anybody pass judgment on us, not judge ourselves based on these scars, and not judge others based on their scars. I really seriously believe that, you can heal to a point where you're not going to have issues, that this cycle will eventually end. It just takes, as Jasmin says, it just takes healing through the process.
Let's talk about trust for a little bit. When somebody is abused, that obviously abuses trust at the same time. And when we grow up in an environment like this, right, and whether it's an isolated incident or if it's a continuing problem, whether you're talking about physical abuse or sexual abuse, trust is a very big issue. I mean, it affects every relationship that you have. So is that addressed in the healing process right away? Is like, we need to open up a space of trust, and how do people allow themselves to kind of open up? Jasmin, you want to take that?
I think rebuilding trust is an individual thing, and that it's very much going to be a personal experience, very much an individual experience for every person. You can't ever force these things. I don't think you can't ever say, well, okay, now you've got to have trust. I think trust comes from learned experiences. Matt and I sat in on something in Newark where a psychotherapist from New York, Michael Weiner, was talking about trust being formed in the 0 to 2 year period. And, that's where we learn trust in those very early formative years. And so I think that, trust it comes about only through experiences. It's funny that you mentioned trust. I won't go into the whole story, but it's one of my core words that I stick to in my values, and trust is very important to me. And it was something that I hadn't really identified as to why. But when I think about what my core values are, I must have trust, and I must trust the process, and I don't trust easily. So that, it's a choice for me to look for trust in things, but it's something that I continually have to work at. So for me, trust isn't something you kind of, it's not an apple you pull off the tree and bite into that and go, yeah, all right, I've got this. It's a continual experience, because, life experiences drag things away from us all the time. I can trust that the bus is going to be on time. Well, you know what? It wasn't today, so I won't trust it tomorrow. So, that's sort of the way I see trust.
Right. So with Hurt to Healing, this project, how do you get people to come to you? By the time people do get to you, I'm sure that they are well aware of what abuses have happened in their life, and they're ready to kind of make a change and deal with that process. With these seminars that you guys do, what's the process behind the workshop? I know I've seen you do a workshop.
Yeah, at the moment, really we're trying to create conversations. Our aim is to still create conversations and give education and to bring this topic up so that people can start to ask questions, and then slowly, people start to filter through to us. Before they're ready for attending anything like a workshop, they do need to have, it's not like you wake up one day and you sort of go, wow, I was sexually abused. I better head off to a workshop to deal with this. There is kind of a fair bit of work that goes through before that. It's not the kind of thing where we can just present to a room and say, well, 1 in 6 of you have been sexually abused. Who wants to come to a workshop? It's it's very much an individual thing. So our aim really is at the moment to just keep creating conversations, and to, we've got an opportunity next year at, I hope I get the name of the university right, Washington University, to present on male sexual assault for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. They very much have a female agenda, and so we're breaking into those. Everybody acknowledges that male sexual assault has occurred, but there's not many people dealing with it. So it's more about, at this point, raising awareness, and then people approach us to start the conversations, and then, start to share their stories. Getting people's stories out of them is a big deal in moving forward and getting them to, start to speak about what it is that's happened to them.
I listen to a podcast occasionally. It's from Chris Ryan, and he's an author of the book Sex at Dawn. And he deals with a lot of behavioral science. This is about the evolutionary process of where we've come from, over the eons. And one of his friends actually calls him a shame exorcist because it deals with human sexuality. And
I like that.
Yeah, I figured you guys would. I wanted to bring that up. So, anyways, but a lot of people, they get fucked up by their sexuality, and it's a crazy carnival for a lot of people. I mean, it's a wide spectrum, and many people can lay anywhere on that spectrum that they want. But I think that it's important to recognize that in an abuse situation, whether you're talking physical or sexual abuse, the guilt and the shame that you carry is really unwarranted. And it's something that you carry just because you think you have to, I would imagine. So by helping people let go of their shame, I would consider you both shame exorcists.
Yes.
So congratulations.
I like that word. Thank you.
You can take it. You got to give it to Chris Ryan, though.
Yeah. I fully acknowledge that one. That's brilliant. Shame, I'm a huge fan of Brené Brown and her work that's done on researching shame and vulnerability, and becoming aware of that, and how debilitating shame is, has really shaped the way I work and the way I see how limiting it is on people. With shame usually comes isolation, because, when we feel, I don't know if you know the differences or the defined differences between shame and guilt, but shame says I am and guilt says I did. So when we look at shame, we look at, I am this behaviour, I am a bad person, I am, I don't know, a sexual deviant. Like you can put all of these, these words around shame. Best up there. Guilt is that I did a behaviour. So, I did cheat, I did lie, I did, do whatever. And so with shame, with guilt, there's usually conversation around it. With shame, it's isolation, because you don't want anyone to know the type of person that you are. And so then you identify with that type of personality. And so it's breaking down those. And in the conversations that I have with men, which I have many, many private conversations, the first thing that I do is normalise that they're not alone, that they're not the only ones that have endured this. And in relation to sexual assault, many times, especially when it's occurred in the younger years, it's actually been a loving relationship. There's often love between the perpetrator and the victim. And as hard as that can be to understand, actually, if you read the original Hurt to Healing story, one of those relationships in there was a very love-based relationship. It doesn't mean that it wasn't sexual assault. It was definitely sexual assault. When you've got an older and a younger child, or an older adult and a child, it's the same thing. But there is often a love connection there. And so, then there's questions about sexuality. Am I homosexual? Am I, so many things that go along with it. It becomes an identification that I am this or I am that, and that's where shame really impacts.
Do you think that once people break that silence and come out of the proverbial closet, that helps their healing process immediately, and that it catalyzes, this is what I need to do?
Yes. Yep. Yes, it does. The really funny thing is I was in therapy, and I've told Jasmin this, that before my divorce, I was in couples counseling with my ex-wife, and my ex-wife kept bringing up the fact that she thought I was addicted to sex. And I don't think I am. I might be, who knows. But anyways, the therapist said, looks at me and goes, do you think that potentially your sexual preference and your sexual deviations or your sexual desires are actually based on your past experiences of sexual abuse and molestation? And I just sat there with my jaw open, my eyes bugged out like I was in some cartoon, and she just knocked me with the freaking board, because I'm like, and I just sat there and looked at her and said, are you kidding me? There's no possible way that is true. And, as I worked through it, I'm like, yeah, that Jasmin and I have talked about it a number of times. Yep. To truly, remove shame, you have to accept everything that you are. That includes everything, your sexuality, your preferences, your dislikes, we can't accept only part of us because the other part scares us. We have to accept every part of us. And that's really the only way to remove shame fully, is to go, okay, well, this is me. I need to be happy with who I am and the way I am. Yeah, there's no other way about it.
If everybody else isn't, then fuck them, really. It's your life.
Exactly.
Yeah, it becomes about, viewing yourself with compassion as well. It's great to view the world with compassion. We have to have compassion for ourselves, and we have to have, I've had to forgive myself.
I really don't think you can view the world with compassion until you have compassion for yourself. It's an adage, you have to love yourself before you can love others, and it really is true.
It's very, very true. And, everybody thinks that the burden is on somebody else. None of us take enough responsibility, or, it's certainly most common that people aren't taking enough responsibility for how they show up in the world is what's going to impact things, down the line and into the universe, and that it all comes from love. It all starts from love for yourself and compassion and kindness and acceptance around what's happened. But I've had to forgive myself for some pretty awful things over the years, and it's liberating, and it's possible. And that doesn't mean that I'm taking away responsibility. It's actually putting acceptance around what happened and saying, well, okay, that's it.
Doesn't mean you still can't have remorse on something you've done. Yeah.
No, you can still have remorse on it. Yeah, absolutely. But it doesn't have to define your future.
Sure.
Sure. No.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I appreciate you both joining. Why don't you give us some shout outs on where people can find Hurt to Healing, where they can find you guys, and spread the word of Matt Bryan and Jasmin Newman.
Okay, well, the website is hurttohealing.com. We also have a group on Facebook that is primarily for men. The only woman in there is Jasmin. We also have the Indiegogo. I had to look that up.
Don't worry, it'll be in the episode notes, everyone.
Yeah. But the Indiegogo thing is, when Jasmin and I were in Chicago for 10 days, we walked around and we realized that there was possibly an epidemic here that we haven't even thought about. And one of our arms is, this is the reason for the Indiegogo, is that we want to start offering this to homeless men or men that cannot afford to attend to one of our workshops. So we set up a certain amount of money that we needed to create the infrastructure for the workshop and potentially give 10 to 20 men an opportunity to sit in front of us and start the healing process with them. And that's why this was all set up. And, you know, this is something that really deeply feeds both of us. And it's, you know, it boggles the mind that so many people are just ignored about this, you know, because we sat there and looked at the homeless people in Chicago and said, you know, wow, some of these guys are very intelligent, very, you know, well-spoken, you know, they're just out here because there's something that's keeping them from society, from keeping them from contributing to society. It's more than just, I'm homeless. So that's what the Indiegogo effort is for.
Got it, yeah. And one final question I really have for you guys is, for the people out there who say this is all bullshit, people have to talk about their feelings. I deal with it myself just internally, and I never talk to anybody about it. Nobody knows that this ever happened. Is that a ticking time bomb waiting to happen? What would you recommend to somebody who's thinking those thoughts?
I think I almost hope that kind of, dare I say, rhetoric from men is becoming a lot less. I know that you know, there's a lot of awareness now that men do need to start to talk and to start to share their stories and to have someone to talk to. And I think men themselves have done the most work on this. They've recognised that, you know, well, you know, the Australian thing is a slap on the back and she'll be right, you know. She'll be right, mate, don't worry about it. And, you know, we've come a long way in the mentality. In men have come a long way with that. And yeah, I think that getting their stories out and starting to talk is necessary. They recognise, you know, men have an equal number of feelings as what women do. And, you know, working through those it's not about having a feminine side, in my opinion. It's quite the opposite of that. It's accepting your manhood and accepting, you know, who you are, and that this shit has happened to you too, and that it's okay to talk about, because, you know, you're not Iron Man, you're not Superman, and I don't care who you are. Some of you would, you know.
Really?
Yeah,
what? I thought every man was Superman. I thought we could handle everything. We can handle anything that's sent to us, and I do believe that we really can handle everything that's sent to us in the right in the right setting. You have to have a support system behind you. You have to be able to talk about your feelings. You have to be able to cry. You know, I can't even tell you how many tears I've shed in the last 3 months with losing my grandma and my dog, and, you know, feeling sorry for myself with a broken leg. It's, you know, it's something that you have to do. You have to go through these things.
Yeah,
I agree. And like, to add to what Jasmin said, you know, I do believe that men are ticking time bombs if they don't deal with it. Do they have to deal with it? No. But, you know, we all know of at least one person or two people, or, you know, quite a few people that have died and potentially have had this issue haunting them for a long period of time, and they just didn't feel comfortable coming forward. And, you know, we both got into this because we don't want that to happen. We want men to actually start acting like men, feeling like men, instead of, you know, and I say this all the time, being the scared little boys hiding inside the shell of a man because they don't know how to be a man. They're still the little boy hiding inside. And we don't want that. You know, when my little boy stopped being so afraid and scared, my anger disappeared. And I was actually able to embrace everything that was about me, instead of just being this little boy who was scared and afraid of everybody finding out that he was just a little boy.
Well, I think that's a good place to part here. I appreciate you both being on the show. Everybody out there who's listening.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we have some female listeners. Largely our audience is men. 1 in 6 of you out there statistically have been abused. And if you haven't dealt with it, it probably is a damn good idea to do so. Probably will turn your world upside down. But on the flip side of that, I'm sure you'd be a much better person. I encourage you to reach out to Matt and Jasmin with Hurt to Healing. You can find them on Twitter. You can find them on Facebook. I'll have a lot of episode notes up that you guys can reach out to them. I appreciate the work that you guys are doing. I know there's a lot of dudes out there who do need help, and appreciate you guys being out there and willing to help those individuals. My hat's off to both of you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jason.
Anything else you guys want to add?
No.
I think
All right. Yeah, we covered a lot. So.
You pretty much covered most of it.
Matt, thanks for being so honest. Same with you, Jasmin. Appreciate you guys what you do, like I said. And hope to talk to you guys again soon.
We will.
Cool.
All right, hang loose out there,
forward to
everyone.
it.
Well, there you have it, gang. Matt Bodhi Bryan and Jasmin Newman dropping the honesty like none other. Check them out on social media. Both of them are on Facebook. You can also find Hurt to Healing on Facebook and through Twitter. You can find links in the episode notes to everywhere you want to go. I wanted to give out a brief homework assignment for this episode. Our 40th episode, by the way, is to take a step to heal something in your own life, whether it's sexual abuse or not. There's lots of challenges that surround us in the world, and everybody's got their own problems. A lot of people take those problems and stuff them down and never really deal with them, which I believe is a detriment to us and our full potential. So whatever it may be, reach out to a friend or talk to somebody anonymously or however you want to do it, but just take one step in the general direction of healing something that's broken in your life. So take that for what it's worth. If you want to discuss with us further, if you like something or dislike something about the podcast, you can always shoot me an email, igccast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter at igccast. We are also on Facebook, Google+. We've got a YouTube channel. We're on iTunes and Stitcher. If you guys would drop us a rating or review on anywhere you find this podcast, definitely would help and make us feel pretty good about ourselves, to be honest. All of our old podcasts are available for free at any time. And like I said earlier, if you want to support us, head on over to our website, intellectualgentlemansclub.com. There's the support page right there where you can find all the links. Most of our music is brought to you by Secrets. Our exit music today is going to be brought to you by Two Door Cinema Club. The track is called Next Year. Pay attention to some of the lyrics. I thought it was a good choice for the exit music, so appreciate that out there. You're going to hear a little bit from Jason Silva. He produces something called Shots of Awe. You can find that on YouTube. It's a YouTube channel. I'm sure you guys know who Jason Silva is. If not, look him up. He's on Twitter, Facebook, all that stuff. Give him some digital love. It's called Shots of Awe. This particular Shots of Awe is actually called Awe. So I hope you enjoy it. Until next time, this is Jason Abbott signing off. Hang loose, everyone.
So I think a lot about the contrast between banality and wonder, between disengagement and radiant ecstasy, between being unaffected by the here and now and being absolutely ravished emotionally by it. And I think one of the problems for human beings is mental habits. Once we create a comfort zone, we rarely step outside of that comfort zone. But the consequence of that is a phenomenon known as hedonic adaptation. Overstimulation to the same kind of thing, the same stimuli again and again and again, renders said stimuli invisible. Your brain has already mapped it in its own head, and you no longer literally have to be engaged by that. We have eyes yet see not, ears that hear not, and hearts that neither feel nor understand. There's a great book called The Wandering Brain that says that one of the ways that we elicit wonder is by scrambling the self temporarily so that the world can seep in. Henry Miller says even a blade of grass, when given proper attention, becomes an infinitely magnificent world in itself. Darwin said attention, if sudden and close, graduates into surprise, and this into astonishment, and this into stupefied amazement. That's what rapture is. That's what illumination is. That's what that sort of infinite comprehending awe that human beings love so much. And so how do we do that? How do we mess with our perceptual apparatus in order to have the kind of emotional and aesthetic experience from life that we render most meaningful? Because we all know those moments are there. Those are the moments that will make final cut. Only in these moments we experience afresh the hardly bearable ecstasy of direct energy exploding on our nerve endings. This is the rhapsodic, ecstatic bursting forth of awe that expands our perceptual parameters beyond all previous limits. And we literally have to reconfigure our mental models of the world in order to assimilate the beauty of that download. That is what it means to be inspired. The Greek root of the term means to breathe in, to take it in. We fit the universe through our brains and it comes out in the form of nothing less than poetry. We have a responsibility to awe.
I don't know where I am going to rest my head tonight, so I won't promise that I'll speak to you today. But if I ever find another place, a better time, for that moment I was never what I am. Take me to where you are, what you've become, and what you'll do when I am gone. I won't forget, I won't forget. Maybe someday you'll be somewhere talking to me as if you knew me, saying I'll be home for next year, darling, I'll be home for next year. In between the lines is the only place you'll find what you're missing, but you didn't know was there. So when I say goodbye, you must do your best to try and forgive me this sweetness, this sweetness. 'Cause I don't know what to say. Another day, another excuse to be sent your way. Another day, another year. Maybe someday you'll be somewhere talking to me as if you knew me, saying I'll be home for next year, darling, I'll be home for next year. And maybe sometime in a long time you'll remember what I had said there. I said I'll be home for next year, darling, I'll be home for next year. If you think of me, I will think of you. Maybe someday you'll be somewhere talking to
I never said I was a gentleman,
Actually,
motherfuckers.